At the base of Lenin Peak, a radio click was heard, then silence, then another click. A faint, barely understandable voice could be heard. "There are 2 of us left. We can't go on anymore. In 15 to 20 minutes, we'll be dead." The radio went silent, then clicked back on. Wind could be heard faintly in the background, but there were no more voices. This is the Lenin Peak disaster. In July 1974, Molly Higgins, a 24-year-old climbing instructor from Colorado, was carrying supplies across a snowfield at Camp 2, also known as Crevasse Camp on Lenin Peak. Molly was an experienced climber and instructor climbing the 14ers in Colorado. But this mountain was entirely different. She was out of her element and she knew it. But she was confident and excited, and this was a great opportunity to meet other much more experienced climbers from around the world. In particular, she was excited to meet a very famous female climber from Russia, Elvira Shataeva. Shataeva was somewhere at base camp, but Molly had not seen her yet. Now, Molly was carrying supplies at Camp 2 with a group of Americans when the ground began to shake, and a deafening creaking sound filled the air above Molly. The sky went from blue to black as tons of snow and ice launched off of an ice tower above camp. The members of the group scattered to take cover as much as they could. 2 members jumped into a nearby crevasse to take cover as others had no option but to simply squat and cover, but they were lucky. Many were covered in snow and ice, but not much as the main portion of the avalanche had just missed them at Camp 2, but had moved directly toward Camp 1 where 4 climbers had already descended. Molly Higgins and the others rushed down toward Camp 1 to find Alan Steck, an extremely experienced climber from Berkeley, California, buried up to his neck. They dug him out and found that all climbers were accounted for. They had dodged a bullet, but those who would survive the next week would look back upon this event as a warning from the mountain of what was to come. The shaken climbers descended to base camp, where 230 climbers from 10 Western countries, Eastern Europe, and Russia waited. They gathered for the largest climbing event in Russian history to that point. The event was planned to showcase the region of Russia and their climbers, as well as create good relations with the Western countries during the political rivalry of the Cold War. As Molly arrived at base camp, assisting one of the injured men, she came face to face with Shataeva. Elvira Shataeva was one of the most, if not the most, famous climber in Russia in 1974. Shataeva was a Russian professional climber with the bestowed title of Master of Sport, which was a top credential in the Soviet Union, particularly in 1974, and having bestowed the title to a woman. She was an extremely strong woman and proud of her accomplishments. When meeting the American climber Molly Higgins, Shataeva said, "I am Elvira Shataeva, Master of Sport. What are you?" As if, "This is my name, these are my credentials, what are yours?" Molly Higgins, along with many other female climbers around the world, admired Shataeva for her climbing talent and her push to prove that women could climb any mountain that a man could. She had previously led climbs on Koronevskaya in Tajikistan and Ushba in Georgia. Shataeva was now at Lenin Peak to lead a team of 8 of the best Russian women climbers at the time. Her team included Tatiana Bradasheva, Nina Vasilyeva, Ilsiar Makhmedova, Galina Parakyodek, Irina Yubimtseva, Valentina Fateyeva, and Ludmila Manzarova. All were excellent and experienced climbers that were ready to tackle Lenin Peak. Lenin Peak is on the modern-day border of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan and is the second highest peak in the Pamir Mountains. Lenin Peak is 23,406 feet in elevation and is one of the least technical over 7,000 meter peaks in the world. The danger of this mountain comes from the changing weather and avalanches that can occur, as well as the sheer altitude. Every year, hundreds of climbers summit Lenin Peak. Up until 1974, no climber had died on this mountain. However, 1974 would be much different. This team of 8 climbers were converging on the mountain during the most treacherous season on the mountain yet, and they would reach the peak just as the worst storm of the season converged. There are 16 classic routes that are famous around the world for having easy access and being uncomplicated. This can be extremely misleading given the fact that the peak is over 23,000 feet. This extreme altitude makes any climb to the summit reserved for only the most experienced climbers. On July 30th, the Russian women's team left base camp headed for Camp 1. The weather was sunny and relatively warm, and the wind was light. It was great weather for climbing. They rested at Camp 1 and then headed out for Camp 2 on July 31st. Shatayeva's team made good progress, as did all other teams on the mountain. On August 2nd, the team was about 1 hour from Summit Ridge when Shatayeva reported to Vitaly Abalakov, an extremely experienced and well-respected climber who was communicating with the other teams from base camp. Everything is okay, the weather is good, the wind is mild, and the way is easy. Everything is so good that we are even disappointed in the route. This is the last time that anyone would underestimate the mountain. On the morning of August 3rd, Shatayeva was concerned that many climbing groups around them would diminish their achievement. Particularly, she thought it would be very easy for people to believe that she had assistance from the male teams. She decided to stay back at Camp 3 on August 3rd so the other teams would not be around when they went for the summit on August 4th. Abalakov at base camp agreed with their strategy and relayed to them that the weather outlook was positive. However, later that day, the weather turned. That same day, a team of 3 Americans, Jock Glidden, Christopher S. Wren, and the man that had previously been buried in the avalanche, Alan Beck, made their way to Camp 3. They reported worsening whiteout conditions and stated that they would ride out the storm at Camp 3 and Summit when the weather passed. Early on August 4th, the team headed toward the summit. Shatayeva reported to base camp, "The weather is getting worse. It's snowing. That's good. It will cover the tracks so that no one accuses us of following a path." The team was seen 400 feet below the summit by a solo climber named Richard Allen North of Scotland. He jokingly stated to the women, "The air is thin up here, isn't it?" The joke was lost in translation and the women replied, "But we are strong. We are women." North continued his descent as the women continued their way up the mountain. Despite the worsening conditions, the women's team made the summit. When they arrived, they reported to base camp of the worsening weather conditions and stated that even though the conditions were bad, as long as they could descend, they would. The radio operator reported that the weather was bad and that it was only going to get worse, but supported their decision. The radio operator at base camp also informed all other groups of the impending bad weather, although not all groups received the message. Particularly, Richard Allen North did not receive the message, neither did the 3 Americans that were at Camp 3. A Japanese team that was camped nearby also did not receive the message. Base camp radioed the women and congratulated the group on a successful summit, and then wished them a successful descent. However, only a few moments later, Shatayeva radioed again that the visibility was only 20 to 30 meters and that they could not find their descent route. Instead of risking it, they were going to set up camp and wait out the weather until they could find their way down. A short time later, she also indicated that the weather was windy and cold, and visibility was now 0. But the women were feeling well, and they were confident in their decision to camp. Base camp agreed with the decision, but warned the wind may increase and it may get colder. The team needed to get up early and try to find the path down. They needed to get down as soon as possible. On August 6th, communication between the team and base camp increased, as did anxiety about the conditions and the decisions that would have to be made. On August 6th, at approximately 10 a.m., Shatayeva informed base camp that there was still no visibility and asked for recommendations from base camp. Abakalov told Shatayeva to rest and wait until about 1 p.m. for recommendations. However, when 1 o'clock came, the conditions had only gotten worse. There was still 0 visibility and they didn't know which direction to go, but they were ready to leave. The team that had previously denied help on Ascent was now stuck and asking if there was anyone headed their direction that they could tag along with. Shatayeva then requested directions from the obelisk to the descent route in the direction of Lenin Peak. Base camp replied that when facing the obelisk, descend to the left. However, there are no landmarks on that route. There are just ice and snow fields. Base camp stated that it was too dangerous and recommended not taking that route in low visibility. Later that day, at 5 p.m., Shatayeva again radioed base camp. This time, the tone was much more urgent, as the temperature became colder and the wind increased. We're fed up with being here. It's so cold. We've already lost all hope of improvements in visibility. We just want to start the descent. Before descending, we'll listen to you. Please invite a doctor to the comms. We have a question. We need his consultation. Shatayeva told the doctors at base camp that 2 of her members were sick. One of them had been throwing up after she tried to eat anything for more than a day. The doctor at base camp recommended injecting both members with the medicine that they had taken on their climb and ordered them to descend by the Lipkin route immediately. Shatayeva was also issued a reprimand for not telling base camp of the illness sooner. Her reply was simple. As far as the reprimand is concerned, I'd prefer to receive it at the base, not the summit. The weather was so bad on the 6th that no team left any camp for the summit. The team began their descent. The next communication was from Shatayeva. The following morning, August 7th. Yesterday, at 11 p.m., Irina Lubimtseva tragically died during the descent. Immediately after this report, many teams of many nationalities departed base camp to assist the stranded climbers. Base camp also attempted to contact groups on the mountain. However, they could not contact the American group that was at Camp 3. The American group's radios had been confiscated by customs. They had to borrow radios before their ascent. The radios that they had borrowed had a weak signal and they had lost communication with base camp. Base camp contacted a Japanese team that was near Camp 3 and asked them to check on the women. Several of the Japanese team members exited their tent only to return a short time later and state that it was impossible. The weather was just too bad. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Shatayeva informed base camp that 2 of their party was dead. Everyone else was suffering from frostbite and that many of their packs had been blown away. They only had 3 sleeping bags for 5 people and were struggling to keep warm. Base camp encouraged the team to keep going and to contact them every hour. At 3:15, Shatayeva checked back in, informing base camp that all their packs had been blown away and that they had nothing left. Over the next few hours, base camp contacted the other teams, requesting that they search for the women's team when the storm clears. They were still not able to contact the American team. They also continued attempting to contact Shatayeva. At 9:12 p.m., communication comes through from Shatayeva's team, but it is not Elvira Shatayeva. The radio clicks, then silence, then clicks and silence. Then they hear a crying voice of Galina Perehaduk. There are 2 of us left. We can't go on anymore. In 15 to 20 minutes, we'll be dead. The radio clicked 2 more times, but only wind was heard in the background. There were no more voices. On Thursday morning, August 8th, the storm cleared. The American team, Jock Glidden, Alan Beck, and Christopher Wren, were still near Camp 3 at 22,000 feet. They had not received the message to descend. They had not received any messages about the group of women. They had no idea of the events that had taken place just above them. Now that the storm cleared, and after 3 days of waiting out the storm in near unbearable conditions, the team finally continued their ascent. On the way up Summit Ridge, they met up with a group of 6 Japanese climbers that had also been waiting out the storm and were unaware of what lay ahead. At just a few hundred feet from the summit, they came across Shatayeva laying in the snow. She looked peaceful and as if she was resting upon first glance. Then it sank in. She was frozen in the snow. They used the Japanese team's radio and relayed the message to base camp. This is the first time they heard of the tragedy that had taken place the night before. Base camp asked them to find the other women. The combined group continued up the ridge, finding one body after another. In total, they found 7 of the 8 women. 3 frozen bodies were wrapped in a torn tent, 1 was doubled over a climbing rope, and 2 more had fallen down the slope and were stuck in the snow. The climbers marked the locations of the bodies for future burial or retrieval. That night at camp, all 3 Americans insisted that they heard the voices of the Russian women. They would open the tent time and time again to find nothing. Elvira's husband, Vladimir Shatayeva, had been climbing in the Pamir Mountains and only learned of the tragedy when he arrived at Lenin Peak, as everyone at base camp was mourning the tragedy. A plan was already being prepared to identify and bury the bodies. Vladimir volunteered to lead the climb and identify and document the scene. During the ascent, he prepared himself, knowing that he was going to identify his wife's body. She was the first one that he saw. He documented everything about the scene in detail. Then he did the same for the other 7 women. All 8 women were found. They dug 2 graves and buried all 8 bodies. 1 year later, Vladimir requested permission to lead a team back to the summit to retrieve the bodies. As anyone can see from the bodies on display on Mount Everest, when climbers die on a mountain, they stay there. But this caught the attention of the country. Requests from the families of the climbers as well as overwhelming support from the public persuaded the Russian committee to approve the request. Vladimir led a team including 2 women inspired by Elvira and retrieved the bodies of the 8 women. The women were then buried at the base of Lenin Peak, and a memorial was erected in honor of the 8 female climbers. Jed Williamson was at Camp 3 on Rezdelny when the storm hit. He later said, "They weren't weak or stupid. I place no blame on them. These conditions converged. It was the perfect storm. I have nothing but admiration. I'm just sad the conditions came together. The storm came in pretty fast and went fast." 2 days later, it was bluebird skies and we were in short sleeves. This is True Mysteries. Please like, leave comments, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.